shi pa tu che tempe chin le yar ngot pelge drolor zambe zepa palden lame shabla solvade Oma Guru Vajradhara Sumati Munishasan Uta Vardhani Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Oma Guru Vajradhara Sumati Munishasan Uta Vardhani Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Oma Guru Vajradhara Sumati Munishasan Uta Vardhani Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om Guru Vajradhara Shasane Karma Uta Vardhani Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om Guru Vajradhara Sumati Munishasan Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om Guru Vajradhara Sumati Munishasan Uta Vardhani Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om Guru Vajradhara Sumati Munishasan Uta Vardhani Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om Guru Vajradhara Nishasane Karma Uta Vardhani Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Pakyuke Kudan Dagi Lo Pakyuke Sundan Dagi Nga Pakyuke Tudan Dagi Ten Yerme Chikto Chingi Loya Makyuke Kudan Dagi Lo Makyuke Sundan Dagi Nga Makyuke Tudan Dagi Chikto Chingi Lo Sashipu Ki Chushi Meto Tramari Rabalinga Shi Nide Gempadi Sangye Shinto Mikte Ulawarki Drokunam Da Shingla Chepar Shoyi Dam Guru Ratna Mindrala Kam Niryataya Sangye Chedan Tsogi Chonam Lai Chancho Pardo Dani Kyapsu Chi Dagi Jinso Give Sonam Ki Drola Pinchra Sangye Druparashu Sangye Chedan Tsogi Chonam La Chancho Pardo Dani Kyapsu Chi Dagi Jinso Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Pinchre Sangye Drupar Shoya Sangye Chedan Tsogi Chonam La Chancho Pardo Dani Kyapsu Chi dagi chushe gibe sonam ki drola pinchra sange druparasho. Nel Buddha, nel Dharma e
In
nel
the
Sangha
Buddha, Dharma,
prendo
and Sangha,
rifugio fino
I take
all'illuminazione.
refuge until
Con la
enlightenment.
pratica
With the
della
practice of
generosità e delle altre
generosity and the other
perfezioni
perfections,
possa
may
io
I
ottenere
obtain
lo stato di
Buddhahood
Buddha
for
per
the
il
benefit of
beneficio di
all
tutti gli
sentient
esseri
beings.
senzienti. In the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment through the practice of generosity and the other perfection. May I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Ai ke da lüdane jinge drubodan da mi ke nam da drowa kuinge danam chi tsampa tamche ke tu dagi chöten tamche ke tu dagi chöten. Buongiorno.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, said Lama.
Okay. Esistono alcuni dilemmi,
There's some dilemma,
alcune domande non
some
tanto facili da
questions that
rispondere,
are not so easy to answer,
dove certe
where
volte
sometimes
il problema non si
the
trova
problem
tanto
is
nella
not
risposta, ma nella
found
domanda stessa.
in the question, but
La
in the question,
difficoltà.
in the answer, but in the question
E una
itself.
delle domande
And
abbastanza
one,
comune
let's say, common
è
question
quella che no, viene nella nostra cultura
in
si
our
utilizza
culture we
chi viene
use,
prima, l'uovo o la
we
gallina,
say, what comes first, the chicken or the egg?
o che cosa c'è prima,
Or,
o esiste prima il grande o il
or
piccolo,
what comes first? What
il
was
qui
first,
o lì.
the big or the small, the here
E
or
ci
the
sono
there?
un'infinità di
And
cose
there's an
che sono
infinite number of
mutuamente
things that are
dipendenti,
mutually
che esistono una
exclusive.
in
I mean,
dipendenza
one
dell'altra,
exists in
nel senso che
dependence on
sono
the
due cose
other.
diverse,
They are two
ma
different
se non c'è una
things,
non c'è
but
l'altra,
if there
se non
isn't
c'è l'altra
one,
non c'è l'una,
then the other
sono
is not
mutuamente
there.
dipendenti
They
e per
depend
questo
on
sono
each other to exist.
interdipendenti.
They are interdependent.
E nella nostra domanda
Our
spesso
question
chiedi cosa avviene
often,
prima,
we ask what comes first,
quando in certi
when in
casi
some
non esiste un
cases
prima,
there is no
esiste
first.
unicamente un
There's
insieme.
only the union, the togetherness.
So che
I know
sembra che sono
it
un po'
seems like
enigmatico,
I'm being a
criptico in
little
qualche modo, che
I'm
sto
being a little
cercando di riassumere per andare al punto di
vague.
vista.
I'm trying to summarize it, to get to the point here.
Facciamo un esempio.
Let me give you an example.
Sentiamo il suono della campana.
Can you hear the sound of the singing bowl?
E se io chiedo a ognuno
And
di
if I
voi,
ask
state
each
sentendo il
one
suono
of
della
you,
campana o no?
are you listening? Can you
Senza
hear the
filosofare,
sound of
molto
the
domanda
singing bowl
semplice, banale. Sentite il
without
suono o no?
philosophizing? I mean,
Sentiamo.
can you hear it or not?
Come avviene quando sentiamo il suono della campana?
How does that come about?
Cioè, fisicamente
Physically,
io tocco
I
con il
touch
bastone la
the
campana,
I touch with
viene generata
the
una
stick
vibrazione
the singing
nel
bowl.
metallo della campana che
A
genera
vibration is
vibrazioni nell'aria
generated
che
from the metal
arriva
of the
al
singing
nostro
bowl
udito,
that travels, comes
che
to our
fa muovere
hearing,
dei sensori che
that
abbiamo
moves
all'interno dell'udito
the
che noi percepiamo
sensors that
come
are
suono.
inside our hearing that we perceive as
Chiaro?
sound. Clear?
Perciò
So
esistono
There's some parts. There's the actual sound, the vibration in the air. There's our sense power that perceives, that receives the vibration in the air. And then there's our sense hearing that perceives that signal that comes to that physical sense power of the hearing. Now, the sound that I hear is not the same one that each one of you hears, and vice versa. And not because I'm the Lama, no. Each one of us hears a different sound. Why? Because the position that we're sitting in is different. So the vibration that comes through the air comes to us in a different way. And what about our sense powers? Are they all the same? Our hearing, is it all the same? No, it's different. And the sense consciousness, that too is different. So the sound that I hear is not the same sound that you hear, that any of you hear. Now, the sound that we do hear, not only is there the sense here, is there the hearing consciousness, but there's also a part of our mind, and we're going to go see, which is called discernment, that actually attributes a name to it. Says, this is sound. This comes from a singing bowl. And when I attribute a name, that name comes together with a concept, with a mental image, a memory. This sound maybe brings us emotions, memories, concepts that we're going to attribute to this sound. And what we attribute, each one of us, is going to be different. So if we were to analyze the sound that I hear and the sound that each one of you hear, is it the same or is it different? It's different. It's similar, but in Tibetan we say Drana no Mayin. If it's similar, by definition, it's different. That which is similar, by definition, is different. My point is the following. The mind that perceives the sound, and I don't mean on a general level the mind, I mean that thought, that specific mind that perceives the sound of the singing bowl. Can it exist without the sound of the singing bowl? To say, in this sound, can you hear the sound of the singing bowl? No. To have the mind that perceives the sound, we need the sound. That's clear, isn't it? At the same time, the sound that each one of us hears, does it exist independently from the mind that perceives it? No. Let me explain myself better. The sound that I hear depends from my sense power, the value that I attribute it to it, and it's the same for each one of you. In other words, what I perceive exists, but it doesn't exist as I perceive it independently from all of the filters through which I perceive. And so now we get into a very important topic, discussion, this non-duality between the external and internal reality. I decided to start with from a difficult point of view for one reason, to avoid right away, to avoid from the beginning, to fall into an extreme that would say that everything depends only on the mind. No, I mean, external reality exists. We interact one with the other. We can come into contact with the objects of our senses. But all these interactions come through this filter of our own mind. But it's not that it's not that there's only the mind and everything's an illusion. No, we'll come back to this point further along, which is very important, where we're able to understand that this division of inner and outer reality is something that we create. But this is part of our own ignorance.
questi giorni porto anche un libro scritto da un fisico dove c'è un passaggio che spiega questo molto
Even
bene.
there's
Certe
a
volte per noi qualcosa che detta dalla fisica magari è più semplice da capire, anche se durante gli insegnamenti che ho dato in Brasile ho letto il passaggio del libro e poi tanti hanno detto non abbiamo capito nulla. Per me era così bello.
there's a physicist.
Sono anche emozionato mentre lo leggevo.
There's a physicist
di là di
who
quello,
wrote a beautiful book. I've recommended it to many, and people have told me that they don't understand anything. It was anyway. What I see is a reflection of myself, because I see it through the filter of myself. To simplify, let's say that I put on rose-colored glasses, and so what I see, I'll see everything pink, and that depends on the filter, my filtered glasses, and so everything else depends on this union. So what I perceive doesn't exist independently from me, and what I perceive doesn't exist independently from the object of perception. In Tibetan, the definition in Tibetan, in a few words, would be the lack of an existence that is completely autonomous, separated between the perceiver and the object of perception. In any case, in the middle of all of this, the mind has a fundamental role. The way our mental state exists is there are many aspects that are involved. The way we interact with everything. I want to say this again. Our mind is not separate from everything else. For example, our mind has a fundamental connection to our body. This is normally when we talk about the mind, we talk about only the mind and we forget about the body. But there's an enormous, to not say total, relationship between a mind and the body. For example, the mind of a body, the mind of a baby, or the mind of an adolescent, or the mind of an adult. I mean, there are differences, aren't there? Because physically there are also differences. But just look, for example, according to the context in which we grow up, or experiences that our parents, grandparents lived, our DNA that we have, that makes a difference. So our body has an enormous influence on our mind. When the hormones are unbalanced, that influences the mind. What we eat, doesn't that influence the mind too? Of course. So that's what we say. Have you ever heard, for example, in Buddhism, we shouldn't eat garlic? Maybe you've heard this. And that's a simplification, actually. In reality, it's like this. Garlic. When one eats garlic, just after a certain amount, but any amount, let's say, it brings the wind energy down, and that relaxes the mind, but maybe even too much. So it makes the mind foggy-minded. It makes the mind foggy. So if someone is able to meditate well, has a balanced, calm mind, if he eats garlic, that will bring the person to have a foggier mind and go towards this foggy-mindedness, which isn't good for meditation. On the other side, if someone is particularly agitated, too many thoughts, then garlic would be good for that person, would help that person for meditation, because it would diminish that mental agitation. just to say that what we eat really influences our mind. The mind is not separate, it's not a separate entity. Mind and body are always together. And we need to work in all aspects to be in harmony, to be well with ourselves and with others. And along this process, we need to take care of our body, take care of the environment in which we live, and take care of our mind. Among all these points, the body is important, the environment is important, and the mind is fundamental. When we're more at the beginning, if we don't have the body that is a little bit balanced and our environment that is balanced, then we'll have a hard time. But if once our mind is more stable, we can also have an unbalanced body and a polluted environment and still keep a balanced mind. So we give a lot of importance to the mind to be able to direct it. There are 3 levels of mind. And as a consequence, we also have 3 levels of body and speech. Body, speech, and mind always go together. So we have what's called a coarse or gross body, and then also a coarse or gross body, speech, and mind. And then subtle and very subtle body, speech, and mind. This distinction between gross, subtle, and very subtle comes, to be precise, come within the teachings of the Tantra, of the Vajrayana teachings vehicle. Within the Sutra, we don't make this distinction. We talk about the gross mind, and that's all. But let's start with this division. The gross mind, and it's all the mind that is conscious of itself, it's active, it's the mind that perceives its senses, that remembers the past, that projects onto the future. It's the conscious mind, it's the active, more than active, it's the manifest mind, let's say. The manifest mind. The subtle mind is the part of our mind that we can use the term subconscious. Our emotions, our habits, our predispositions, our thoughts that are not currently manifest. An example could be, if someone asks me if I have or not anger, just bring me an object of anger and we'll see. So the anger that we have, but that in this moment is not manifest, where is it? It lies in the subtle mind. There's sadness, there are aspects of joy, there's an infinite number of things. Also in the West, we say that the mind is like an iceberg, where the conscious manifest part is like the tip of the iceberg, and then everything underneath is hidden. I tend not to use the term subconscious because it's very linked to Western psychology. There are similar aspects, but according to Buddhist philosophy, there are also many differences, and I can't make these comparisons. So the point is, there's a gross part of the mind, and then there's the subtle part of our mind. And as we said, there are emotions in the subtle mind, our habits, our memories, what is not currently manifest, but we have inside. And the very subtle mind is based on attraction, aversion, and indifference. These are the most basic, the most basic emotions of the subtle mind are the attraction, aversion, and indifference. And then the very subtle mind, there is no attraction, aversion, there's no concepts, but there are the imprints of our habits, the imprints of our emotions, the predispositions. And once I saw something that was quite interesting to me, an explanation of how DNA works. It was a study, and I just by chance I saw it again. It was on the BBC, and they showed it again. It was a scientist, and she had a twin sister, this scientist, and she did a study on twins, taking the twins who were separated at birth and grew up in completely different situations to see what kind of similarities that they had after 20, 30 years, taking identical twins as the subjects. And there were things that were very similar and things that were also very different. And what she explained was that the DNA that one has, at birth and throughout life, I don't know how to say it in Italian. It says in Italian, the DNA is not. He says it's not determining, but it's a question of probability. It's if one has a gene, this DNA, it's going to depend on the environment as to whether that that comes out or not. And here we can talk about epigenetics as to whether the surroundings, the environment transforms our DNA. And so in our very subtle mind in Buddhism, they're like seeds that were planted, these imprints, and according to interactions, one seed can sprout, or one seed or another can sprout. And this reminds me of once when Lama Ganchen explained to me that when he got to India in the 1960s, there was a time where he had a very difficult life. He was poor, didn't have the resources even to eat twice a day, and the money that he had to pay for his meal, he needed to choose to eat or to use that money to go and see his teacher, who was in Varanasi at the time, and he would use that money to go see his master. And if he was hungry in the evening, he would drink water from the street. He was very poor, many asks. And one day he went to his master, Kyabchen Trita Rinpoche, and he said to him, Lama Ganchen says that he said to him, here you've made a mistake. There's a mistake. The fact that I'm the reincarnation of a Lama that is so evolved. If I were, why, if I am if I am the reincarnation of such a spiritually evolved Lama, why am I not in a pure land? Why am I here with all these problems? And Trita Rinpoche explained, I have no doubt that you are the reincarnation of Kachin Sapena. But when one dies, what continues in the next life are the imprints. And a spiritually evolved person, a tulku like you, when he takes a rebirth, he can seem like a person like anyone else until he meets the conditions for those qualities to flower, to show themselves. And for our good luck, that absolutely happened. So in our life, we have these imprints, and our very subtle mind. These are our imprints of our emotions, of our actions, of our habits, of our memories, of everything that we live in life imprints are created. And this all has to do with our very subtle mind that goes from one life to the next. So, and with these three, there's also a gross body. So this is our body that we can see, that we can actually see, the external part of our body, our inner organs, our blood. This is our coarse or gross body that has a direct connection with the coarse gross mind. We have a subtle body, which is the part of our physical body, but that we can't see with just our own eyes, like our central nervous system, the all the impulses, all the on the energetic level. There are many parts of our body that have to do with our subtle body, and now's not the moment to have a lesson on the anatomy of the subtle body, but it's directly connected to the subtle mind. And then there's the very subtle body, like energy that continues from life to life, that always goes together with the very subtle mind. So the great gross body and mind go together. And the way to understand the relationship between them is that the body is like a blind horse, and the mind is like a rider who is lame, who cannot walk. So the mind cannot go where the body can't go, and the body doesn't know where to go if the mind doesn't direct it. So the gross body, it depends on the gross mind. For example, if someone has a stroke, then the mind and body, you can see they're obviously directly connected. So that's always present, this relationship between body and mind. And there's also speech on a gross level. Our speech is our communication, our verbal speech. But today we also have the written word, text, a written word. This is also a manifestation of our speech, but on a gross level, it's our way of communicating with others. Our subtle speech is the energy that we emanate through our emotions, thoughts. And the very subtle speech is the energy that is emanated from the very subtle mind and body. Now, this is just to give you a general idea, and I want to put emphasis on the body. And then when we go now to look at the mental factors, we're going to be looking at the gross mind. We're not going to talk about the subtle mind or the very subtle mind. We're talking on a very specific way of the gross mind, which is very important because this is the mind with which we have most contact, that we can see, that we can direct. I see it a little bit like this. Let's imagine a sphere of different layers. The external part is our gross mind. And then there's another layer that is the subtle mind, and at the center of everything there's the very subtle mind. What is in the very subtle mind manifests to the subtle mind, and that then manifests to the gross mind. So what happens in our gross mind is a reflection of what is in our subtle mind, which is then in turn a reflection of what is in our very subtle mind. what comes, what floats to the top, the emotions that we show is a result of what is much deeper and much more subtle. At the same time, what happens on a gross level shapes and transforms what is at a more subtle level. Is that clear what I've said? What happens on the gross level is a reflection of what happens on our subtle mind. And that too is a reflection of what happens in the very subtle mind. So our thoughts, our emotions, they also are transforming from out to in. And it's also a reflection from in to out. So every choice we make, every thought we have, everything we feel gradually influences and shapes on a more subtle level. On a subtle level and a very subtle level. It all goes together. And then someone can ask, well, what comes first? Who influences, which one influences the other? Is it the gross, first the gross and then the subtle? No, they come together. It's like an infinite circle. So what we live on a gross level transforms what exists on a more on a deeper level. So a key is to allow ourselves to feel, perceive, and welcome what manifests on a more subtle level without getting into reinforcing on a gross level negative habits. For example, if I have a feeling of, let's choose one among many, abandonment. And at a certain point, there's a situation, and I feel this. I feel abandoned. I have this sense of abandonment. When I feel that, does it come from my gross mind, or is that a reflection from something deeper? Does it start from somewhere more profound? No, it's something deeper. At a certain point in my life, I had experiences. Maybe I even had this predisposition for this feeling from other lives. But in that moment, I lived this experience. And, so if I live an experience that reflects it's a kind of trigger. It triggered something that I had lived in the past. And so I live that present moment as a trigger to past experiences. And so I have this feeling, this sense of abandonment. When that feeling comes out on a gross level, if I have the awareness that that is a reflection of something that is coming from a deeper level, I can not block it. I can choose to not block it. I mean, you can do only more damage by blocking, but I can also not nourish it. I don't reinforce that pattern, that negative pattern. So I have this sense of abandonment, but I'm not going to act physically or verbally, and I skip even. I avoid even getting into an inner dialogue with the feeling. So I allow that feeling to manifest, and I wait for it to pass. In this way, what happens? I'm not reinforcing a deep pattern that I have. And so when it shows up and it's not able to to manifest itself, and then it goes away weaker than when it came. So on a gross level, it's on one level it's the least important because the really important ones happen on a very subtle level, but that's where we can direct our mind and make actual changes. So now we're going to start. When we talk about the 51 mental factors, remember it has to do with the gross mind. Just to clarify this, it's not that the rest doesn't exist, but we're going to talk about the gross mind. And one of the most important characteristics of the gross mind is our ability to observe ourselves, recognize the dynamics of our thoughts, our emotions, and learn how to redirect our thoughts, redirect our emotions on a gross level. It's what we do, and what we do on a gross level has an effect on a subtle level, and as a consequence on a very subtle level. Is this clear up to here? Okay, good. In Buddha's teachings, these teachings, they were given in two different contexts. When Buddha left his body, his disciples got together and they realized that he had given similar teachings, but as we said before, that which is similar is different. He gave them in different contexts. And so when his disciples came together and said, well, Buddha told me this, and another disciple said, well, Buddha told me that. And so who's right? So it created different traditions with respecting each one. And when he explained these contexts of the mind, one's called one in the Vaibhasika tradition and one in the Sautantrika tradition. We will follow here what is called the Sautantrika tradition. It's the other tradition, and they're very similar. One of the differences, instead of 51 mental factors, 56 mental factors are described. And then now we'll get into these mental factors. It doesn't change that much. Just to say where these teachings came from. At the same time, I took a book. This is the book that from which I received these teachings, and I brought the actual book. I'm quite attached to it. This book is what I like so much about this book too. There are all of my notes written in here, but it was printed. Let me see if there's the year. It was printed in 79 and printed with the kind of printer as they used in India at the time. So every letter was in lead, and they were put together by hand. And when you touch it, you can actually feel the printing, the imprint of the letters. And there were this kind of printing have fewer errors because it took so long to compose a page. They were very, very careful, and compared to today's printed books, there are fewer typos. In the Tibetan tradition, there are different texts that talk about the 51 mental factors. But this book, written by Yongzing Yeshe Gyältsän, Yongzing Yeshe Gyältsän was one of great masters of our tradition. He was the master of one of the Panchen Lamas, and he wrote also the commentary of the Guru Puja that we follow. Many, many important commentaries written by Yongzing Yeshe Gyältsän, a master from the monastery of Tashi Lumpo. And this commentary is quite extensive, and my commentary will follow this text. So I'd like to begin at the beginning, which are the praises. When you begin a text, originally, you always start with praise. And if in the little booklet, if you don't have this booklet and you want to follow these teachings, I recommend you get it in the shop. The name of this text is called Asemdam Semchen Gitsul Sorwartompa Losang Gyältsän, which is an ornament to Lama Tsongkhapa's words to clearly reveal the aspects of the mind and mental factors. This text, there's something beautiful about this text because it makes reference actually to another important text that was another important text written by a Sangha, which it's been cited from the Abhidharma Samachaya, Compendium of Knowledge, written by a Sangha. And so just to say that this is the line of transmission, as is nothing that I've invented. And in India, there was a moment where there were many different many interpretations that were different. And there were two masters who made clarity, and one was Nagarjuna and one was Asanga. Nagarjuna clarified mostly the correct view of reality, and Asanga clarified that which has to do with the graduated path to enlightenment, bodhicitta, and also the mental factors. And he wrote this text, this Abhidharma Samacha. And if we'll see further along that the part of the text that is in bold, these are the words from Asanga. And then Asanga had different disciples. His teachings were fundamental, and they came to us after many generations. We don't have the date here. At least 1,100 years ago. And then we have the commentary by Yongzing Yeshe Gyältsän here in italics. So then underneath, then we have the text by Yongzing Yeshe Gyältsän, and the italics is by Lama Michel. And he was from the 18th century, Yongzing Yeshe Gyältsän. So we begin from the praises. The praises are given, first of all, because an author, when he composes a text, and then when we read it, the praises are done, one, to remind us that this is not something that was invented by the author, but that he received it from his masters through an uninterrupted lineage that goes all the way to Buddha Shakyamuni, and then to offer respect to his masters and to create favorable conditions, favorable conditions, so there are no favorable conditions, so that there are no interferences to finish the writing of the text. And another reason is because there are two ways that we can access knowledge. On one hand, knowledge is transmitted conceptually. We learn concepts, we listen, we reason, we read, we reflect, etc. And then we come into contact with knowledge. And on the other hand, there's a nonverbal aspect where once I receive teachings from someone who had received these teachings through an uninterrupted lineage, there's something on a more subtle level, on a nonverbal level that is transmitted. And it's said to be fundamental to have a deeper understanding. And my personal experience is if I go to read something without having had the transmission, it was something quite superficial. But after the transmission, through an uninterrupted lineage, that I had another level of perception. And each one needs to have his own experience about this. So at the beginning, when we make praises, we're also asking for the blessings to all of the masters who have handed down these teachings. I received these teachings through my master in Indian, Geshe Rinpoche, and comes through this uninterrupted lineage. So here we're on page number 7. By accomplishing the two accumulations through the power of compassion, the obscure of darkness is cleared. The obscure of darkness is cleared and all phenomena are known. Whatever seen by you, you make it clear to migrators. Munindra, Lord of the sages, unsurpassable refuge, to you I pay homage. It's an homage to Buddha Shakyamuni. Let's try to understand it. It says, by realizing the two accumulations along the spiritual path to enlightenment, one needs to accumulate what is called merits that has to do with the process of love, generosity, compassion, patience, etc. and the accumulation of wisdom, correct view of reality, the perception of the interdependence of how things really are. And these two realizations are complete through the power of compassion, what pushes, what gives real strength along the path to transform oneself and to walk the path towards enlightenment is love and compassion. So through the power of compassion, you realized, or you completed the accumulation of merit and the accumulation of wisdom. In this way, you were able to clarify, bring light, eliminate the darkness, the darkest, one's own ignorance is this darkness, not seeing the reality of phenomena as they are. It is completely cleared, and all phenomena are known in their real nature. That's a description of the state of Buddhahood. Nige Sinkang Jola Selchepa. So whatever seen by you, observed by you, you made it, you clarified it, you made it clear to migrators. Through the power of your compassion, you reached Buddhahood. And what you saw, the reality, as you saw it, you made that clear to all beings, all sentient beings. Munindra, Lord of the sages, Kyube Lame, Kyube Lame is Munindra, makes reference also to excellent refuge, unsurpassable refuge, the most important of all refuges. You who are the Lord of all sages, unsurpassable refuge, I pay homage. So this is the praise to Buddha Shakyamuni. And if you take the book and you start reading it, it shows you that these teachings come from Buddha Shakyamuni initially. Unique love for migrators, which is embodied as a deity, renowned through the 3 times as the Lord of Love, to the invincible protector, regent of the victorious. With respect from my heart, I prostrate with my mind. Unique love for migrators, which is embodied as a deity. Unique love for migrators makes reference to the feeling of love that is similar to the love of a mother for her only child. And the example that is given is a mother who has only one child, and this child is in great danger. And what the love that she feels, the urgency she feels to save and protect her child is unique. It has no limit. It is beyond selfishness. And this love is embodied in a physical form, like a deity, as a being, as a personification. The embodiment is renowned through the 3 times as the Lord of Love, Maitreya. The Lord of Love means Buddha Maitreya. Is the Lord of Love is the translation of Buddha Maitreya. To the invincible protector, regent of the victorious, because it's said that when Buddha Shakyamuni was born as Prince Siddhartha, he was in a pure land, and there were many Buddhas around, and they said, whose turn is it to go down? And Buddha Shakyamuni came, and those who stayed in the pure land of Tushita was Buddha of Maitreya. That's why he's also called the regent of the Buddhas, regent of the victorious. Now we're not going to get into all the details. With respect from my heart, I prostrate with my mind. Nyingne gupe yinki chaki. Why do we prostrate to Buddha Maitreya? Because in the extended lineage, where we talk about bodhicitta, the mental factors, it goes through Buddha Shakyamuni to Maitreya, and then from Maitreya to Asanga. This is the vast lineage. You have been prophesied by the Sugata, the one gone to bliss himself. The profound and vast pure traditions of the capable one, by making them clear, you are renowned as the great chariot way openers. Now let's look at this transition. To the 6 ornaments and to the 2 excellent ones of this world I prostrate. You have been prophesied by the Sugata. It said that Buddha Shakyamuni, I don't remember exactly the text, but it said that he predicted he predicted that certain masters would arrive to clarify his teachings, and and they're called the 6 ornaments and the 2 excellent ones. So the profound and vast pure traditions of the capable one. The capable one is Buddha Shakyamuni. By making them clear, you are renowned as the great chariot way openers. It's those who opened the path, a bit like as if Buddha gave the tools and the means to walk along the path, but at a certain point the path was obscured, and these masters reopen the path. To the 6 ornaments and the 2 excellent ones of this world I prostrate. It makes reference to the fact that these teachings from Buddha Shakyamuni, they went to Buddha Maitreya, and then going to the other masters called that are the 6 ornaments and the 2 excellent ones. We have them here represented in different places in the temple. If you look towards my right, there's a smaller window. Right away to the right, there's an image of Buddha Shakyamuni with masters around him, and above in the center there's Lama Tsongkhapa, and then the first Dalai Lama, Gyaltsen group, and then there are 8 masters, and the first 2 above. At the left is Nagarjuna, and to the right is a Sangha, and then the other 6 masters around. And together with Buddha Shakyamuni, there's Manjushri and Maitreya. The 2 lineages, one is represented by Buddha Maitreya, that's called the vast lineage, and then the profound lineage. And then there's the profound lineage. We could spend hours talking about this, but when we deepen our studies, the philosophical texts that are studied are the texts written by these masters. In this land surrounded by a range of snow mountains, a garden blossoming with thousands of petals of sutras, tantras, and commentaries is refreshed, making you like the son of the victorious. To the praiseworthy Guru, gentle protector Lama Tsongkhapa, I pay homage. In this land in Tibet, surrounded by a range of snow mountains, is another way of calling Tibet. This range of snow mountains, and here there's the metaphor of the garden blossoming with thousands of petals of sutras, because when Lama Tsongkhapa arrived in Tibet, Buddha Shakyamuni's teachings were already present, but as if they were wilted flowers, and he was able to refresh them, and with like sun that helped blossom the garden. He clarified important points of the teachings. It's not that there weren't people who didn't know these teachings, but there was confusion at the time, and he clarified many points in sutra and also in tantra. So it's said that they were refreshed, is making you like the son of the victorious. I mean, these teachings were already present in Tibet, but the clarity was, it wasn't clear. So to the praiseworthy Guru, gentle protector, Lama Tsongkhapa, I pay homage. Just to conclude this part, it says the praise concludes saying, by seeing just a mere ray of light of your spiritual actions, you make the mind's eye for seeing the pure path clear. Venerable Guru, light that shines like the sun, please remain always at the center of the lotus at my heart. By seeing just a ray of light of your spiritual actions, I mean, we're not able to see every aspect of the spiritual actions of our masters, but even just seeing a small part of those sacred actions, they're able, through their teachings and blessings, their presence, Lamsam Tawe, they're able to open up our minds to be able to see the path to enlightenment. So you make the mind's eye for seeing, that means the inner perception for seeing the pure path, the path to enlightenment. Venerable Guru, light that shines like the sun, please remain always at the center of the lotus at my heart. With this, we conclude the praise. Remember that the praise is not just to remind us. Well, it's a time also to connect with the lineage, ask for blessings, and for me it's fundamental. And maybe it seems boring that I repeat myself so much about this, but it's very, very important part. And the next part of the conclusion of the next part is by Yongzing Here Yongzing Yeshe Gyältsän says, even though words by someone like me are of no benefit for others, and in Tibetan this is called kik ken kyowan, so to be full and then to be empty. So in the beginning of at the beginning of many important texts, the masters write, "I'm no one." It's a way to deflate their ego. Even if you look at the beginning of the Bodhisattva Charavatara, it starts. Shantideva says, I'm not able to write verses. I'm writing this only to help my own mind to familiarize itself with being beneficial to others. So he's saying, I mean, obviously this is not true. I mean, he wrote one of the most important commentaries of our tradition. Says, but to increment the familiarization of my mind with the excellent teachings and Shenki Kunchir, and having been requested by others about the way of the mind and the mental factors, I will briefly write about it in accordance with the Abhidharma works. The Abhidharma is the part of the teachings of Buddha Shakyamuni that talks about this subject. Yongzing Yeshe Gyältsän says, I'm not writing this because I'm important. It's not that I know more than others. I'm writing this, first of all, because I was asked, and I'm writing it as a way to familiarize myself with these excellent teachings. With this, we conclude the part of the praise. Let's just read the praise again one more time. Each verse, I'll read it in Tibetan, and then we'll read it together in English. By accomplishing the two accumulations through the power of compassion, the obscure of darkness is cleared, and all phenomena are known. Whatever is seen by you, you make it clear to migratories. Munindra, Lord of the sages, unsurpassable refuge, to you I pay homage. Unique love for migrators, which is embodied as a deity, renowned through the 3 times as the Lord of Love, to the invincible protector, regent of the victorious, with respect from my heart, I prostrate with my mind. You have been prophesied by the Sugata, the one gone to bliss himself, the profound and vast pure traditions of the Capable One. By making them clear, you are renowned as the great chariot way openers. To the 6 ornaments and the 2 excellent ones of this world, I prostrate. In this land surrounded by a range of snow mountains, a garden blossoming with thousands of petals of sutras, tantras, and commentaries is refreshed, making you like the son of the victorious. To the praiseworthy Guru, gentle protector, Lama Tsongkhapa, I pay homage. By seeing just a ray of light of your spiritual actions, you make the mind's eye for seeing the pure path clear. Venerable Guru, light that shines like the sun, please remain always at the center of the lotus at my heart. At the beginning, everything, Yongzing Yeshe Gyältsän reminds us why we should study the mental factors, and he says, the defects of samsara and the qualities of nirvana, without exception, derive from the mind, as said in Buddhist teachings. Those who have intelligence and discernment must give importance to knowing the secrets of the mind. Everything that exists, positive or negative, derives from the mind. And there's something very important here. At the beginning, we talked about non-duality, but there's also a question that we ask, and our more common way of seeing things. We see that the mind, the consciousness, is a result of matter, and in science, in science, there's actually also one can have the opposite idea that the mind is a result of matter and matter can be a result of mind, but I think it's both. You know, Rinpoche used to say phenomena are crazy. Many of you might remember Rinpoche saying that, like that phenomena are stupid. They don't understand anything. What he meant was that each thing, every phenomenon, its own way of being is not good or bad. It depends on how it's used. And similarly, we beings that we have a consciousness, in our way of interacting, we can use things in one way or another. The things in and of themselves are neither good nor bad. And when we talk about all the qualities of nirvana, joy, stability, peace, well-being comes from the mind. In the same way, all the suffering, the conflict, the war, the problems, the sadness, or any suffering that exists, also this comes from the mind, derives from the mind. And so our mind has enormous power to create peace and well-being or to create suffering and conflict, etc. And being that important, anyone who has a minimum amount of discernment and intelligence should put effort into understanding the mind better. And we have a tool that can produce joy and peace and happiness, or can at the same time produce some suffering. I mean, if we have such an important tool, we would want to know it better. And Yongzing Yeshe Gyältsän says that anyone who has intelligent discernment should give the importance to knowing the secret of the mind. So he begins his text with this verse. It's what will determine. It determines how we live our life, what choices we make. So now let's start from a complex point, a question that is not that easy to answer and not even that easy to understand. But we'll do it not so superficially, but not very deeply either. It's something that needs to be seen and seen again to really understand it. And the question is easy. And the question is, what is the mind? And as I was saying this, I'm looking at our friend Rohir, who works with this, and talking to him. He's a psychiatrist. Even in the scientific world, even within the scientific community, there is not one answer that is shared by all. And he asked if that's true. He said yes. So, if all scientists, psychologists, psychiatrists are not able to define what the mind is, that's problematic. I mean, there's a science that studies the mind and they don't even know exactly what the mind is. So I don't have, let's try to understand some aspects. I don't expect us to clarify everything. Here I had written this book, taking notes. It's not a complete translation of the book, but there are important elements. Awareness is the definition of mind. Clear and aware is the definition of consciousness. Mind, awareness, and consciousness are synonyms. In other words, the mind is luminous and cognitive, or clear and knowing. It's luminous because it's always active. There's never a moment when the mind is in the dark, or rather doesn't have thoughts. It's cognitive or knowing because it always has an object of perception that it apprehends, perceives. In Tibetan, the definition of mind, Salshin Rikpa. Salshin Salwa means clear. Rikpa means that apprehends. And Tibetan is a complex language. The same words can change meaning depending on the context. But trying to translate, Sal is clear and Rik is that perceives. Shin means is clear and it perceives. It's clear because the mind never has a moment that it's not awake. It's not that at the mind at a certain point stops perceiving and then starts again. This level of perception is constant, and at the same time the other word that's used is aware, or the word is used knowing, cognitive knowing, because it always has an object of perception. So the mind is always active and it always has an object of perception on a gross level or on a subtle level or very subtle level. The mind never stops from life to life. There's never a moment where the mind completely stops. At the same time, another meaning of the word clear, here, and there are debates about this, one meaning is that the mind is, how can it be translated? Sorry, it's hard with the, it's hard for me to find the right terms. It's like self-manifesting. It's clear. It has its own light. It doesn't need other to be able to see itself. Question from Bernard. Bernard, who's one of our scientists, he was saying this is another aspect that's connected. Even in the most recent studies, research, it's said that one of the characteristics of the mind is not to actually to perceive what is there, but to actually foresee what is happening. And there are also other studies from the 70s and then also more modern that show that what we see, there's a part of what we see and then there's a part that we are expecting to see. But we're not going to get into this now. The point is that the mind is always aware and it doesn't need any other phenomenon to see itself. It has this ability to be self-cognizing So clear means also this characteristic of being able to see itself, as if it's like saying the mind doesn't need anything else to be. It's autonomous somehow. And here we get into just thousands of debates. How is it the mind can be autonomous without depending on the object of perception? Because the second part says it always has an object of perception. But so this object of perception can also be a mental image, something created by the mind itself. So the mind doesn't need necessarily an external object to exist. It has this ability to, as if it were its own light that's able to light itself to be seen. And so the two key words here to understand what the mind is, Salshing Rigpa, is clear and knowing, luminous and cognitive. So let's try to see these two aspects. One, the mind is always active, even when we don't remember, or we're in deep sleep or in coma, or any moment where apparently one is not actively thinking. The mind is never stopped. And at the same time, the mind always has an object of perception. The object of perception come through our five senses or through the sense of the mind itself. Perceive memories, projections, perceive mental objects, not necessarily physical objects. One thing at a time here, responding to someone's question, is when we say mind, we have this tendency of, we want something that we can point our finger at, say, this is the mind. And the mind is a flow of many, many thoughts. And here we get into what the next part where I wrote, it says there are many ways to classify the gross mind, coarse mind, such as into categories of 7 or 2. The classification into 7 is in terms of valid and non-valid cognition. And after there's this appendix A at the end of this booklet, and there are several classifications into 2, including terms of dominant condition, or as we see here, in terms of nature. This means that the mind is a flow of perception, a flow of thoughts, and every thought has an object of perception, and there are many different ways of being able to classify the mind. So we can divide the mind somehow into direct cognition, just the perceptions, the perceptions related to our senses, or to our logic, or we can also, since we have a few days together, we can also look at these other ways of classifying the mind, and these seen in these 2 apectics. But we talk about 6 types of mind that form what we call mind. And in this moment, for example, we say, in my mind I have this, that, and the other. But in this moment, we have up to a maximum of 6 types of minds or thoughts. It's hard to find the right word, because when we say mind, our tendency is to think of a solid entity, when in reality there are many aspects that compose this entity that we call mind. So when we talk about the primary mind, these are our thoughts, and the mental factors are the characteristics that make up these thoughts. in one moment, we can have up to 6 primary minds simultaneously, which are the mind that perceives form, sound, taste, form, sound, taste, smell, touch, and mental images. So we start with from our 6 senses. So at the same time, I can feel something, and as I'm feeling something, I'm tasting something, and there's also sound, etc. So we can have up to 6 primary consciousness, primary minds simultaneously. And these are what are called primary minds. The primary mind is, how can I say? It's the mind that is manifest, that perceives the sensory objects. This is the translation of the text that says, let's follow the text. So here we have classification of the mind in terms of nature, because you can classify it in other ways, but we're going to follow the mind in terms of nature. And if we have more time, we can look at the other types of classification. So the mind can be classified in terms of nature, the primary mind with Gyältsän, and the mental factors, which are called Semchung.
Tei kor semcho namnis sukla mikpa shire chenes tela sem yower chebe sok chebe la sok chele dans ngar toksingi yul majeba sok kebara midrawara regone sheber chawos tena yul teni la mikpa tsamgis rab tu cheshins yul teni la mikpa tsamgi rab tu cheshin kebar shenke gone sha goba maimbas rikpa tsowo semdans yul teni la mikpa shirre chene chele gi lakche sor kecho shenge dokbe gones yul la jukbe rikpa simchungos. Okay. Vediamo.
Let's see. The primary mind is just like the sensory consciousness that apprehends form, for example. The form or sound or touch or while not arising from a certainty, so a conceptual thought, it manifests by coming into contact with form itself. So when we see something and we perceive the form that we're seeing, we don't need to stop and think, what is this? What is, no, the mind, once it comes into contact with the object, that mind manifests. Its surrounding mental factors, being based on the same object of perception of form, direct the mind to it, and have the function of not forgetting the previously apprehended object, and so on, according to the specific function of the mental factor, such as stabilizing, not forgetting, and we'll look at that after. So the primary mind is the mind that arises once it comes into contact with the object. So when we see something, we hear a sound, or we smell something, or we taste something, or we touch something, or we have a thought, we have a memory, we come into contact with a memory or a projection of the future, a judgment about the present. In that moment, when we come into contact with that sensory object, there's a perception that arises, and that is called the primary mind. That primary mind it has different characteristics, and these characteristics are called mental factors. It's important to understand that mental factors and primary mind are of the same nature. What does that mean? Let's give an example. Let's take a mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum as the mantra, and the syllables Om Mani Padme Hum, the 6 syllables, they are of the same nature. The mantra and the syllables are of the same nature. The mantra doesn't exist without the syllables, but the mantra is not Om, it's not Ma, Ni, etc. The mantra is the union of all, but it doesn't exist independently of each one of the syllables. It's like if we make a dish, what happens? The dish doesn't exist independently from the ingredients that make it up, but the ingredients don't exist. The ingredients don't exist as ingredients of that kind of dish without the dish. So Om, the Om of the Om of the mantra Om Mani Padme Hum exists only within the mantra Om Mani Padme Hum. Of course, Om is part of many mantras, but the Om of Om Mani Padme Hum exists, is dependent on the mantra. So the primary mind is when we observe the mind in a more general way, and then if we look at the details, how the mind is made up, we look at the mental factors. So most of the text has to do with the mental factors, not the primary mind. There's a whole study on the primary mind that has to do with the various ways of cognizing, direct perception, the inferential logic, there's the memory, there's different types of cognition also, but that's not what we're going to look at now. So the primary mind is the mind that perceives the sensory objects, and the mental factors are the aspects that make up that primary mind. So just by apprehending the object of perception, the primary mind, without depending on any specific aspects, simply manifests. Or rather, the primary mind is that which manifests without depending on anything else, except for that relationship of apprehension of the object. And it's by apprehending the object that the mind manifests. The mental factor, having the same specific object of perception as the primary mind, as a basis, directs the mind to enter into contact with the object by means of characteristics, such as the imprints of functions. As where the primary mind arises from apprehending the object of perception in general terms, the mental factor apprehends the same object in a particular way. For example, if the object of perception is in the form of a glass, the mental factor of feeling could be an experience of pleasure. Discernment would call it glass, and mindful recollection would keep the mind from being distracted. In this way, we can say that the mental factors are different aspects that actually compose the primary mind. In fact, the primary mind doesn't exist independently from the mental factors that compose it. They are of the same nature. Furthermore, mental factors have different ways of relating to the same object of perception, but the object as a basis of perception is always the same, as clarified by the 5 concomitant aspects. Or rather, an important point is that when we have a perception, when we come into contact, we think, I mean, we're in constant contact with our senses. Are you able to think a moment where you were not in contact with one of your six senses? It's not possible. That moment doesn't exist. We're always observing, perceiving something constantly. Every time we perceive an object, sensory object, and also objects of the mind, that perception is called a primary mind. What's interesting is that the primary mind has many characteristics, and when we're able to recognize these characteristics, we're able to see that the same object can be perceived and lived in completely different ways. So when I hear the sound of the singing bowl, the moment that each one of us hears it, a primary mind arises. It's the hearing consciousness that perceives the sound of the singing bowl. Now, this consciousness can exist in many different ways. For ourselves, that same perception of the singing bowl, that same mind that perceives the sound of the singing bowl, can exist in different ways according to the mental factors. We can have more attachment. We can add. It depends on our discernment and the value that we attribute it to it. It can be pleasurable. It can be a feeling of suffering. So we all experience it differently. But this primary mind, the primary mind is going to be different depending on the components of those mental factors. But for me, what's really important is that if yes, my mind depends on the reality around me, but the way I feel it, the way I experience it, depends on me. It depends from my discernment, depends on the value that I attribute to this sound, as to whether I see it as pleasurable or not. I mean, many aspects are going to determine how I perceive the sound. And what's important about this is you don't need to immolate everything, but instead gradually make up the right composition that is most beneficial to us. Take away a little bit here, add a little bit there, and this is possible. It's like taking one perception and looking all the aspects and see that there are some parts that are beneficial and positive and some that are not. Have you ever had the feeling that you've observed your own thought and find incoherence within that same thought a primary mind? So we have this object, and in front of this same object, we have contradictory feelings or thoughts. I mean, this happens, doesn't it? We can, for example, so rarely do we have perceptions that are black on white, that's totally one thing or totally another. There are many aspects, and we're able to see these aspects better. We can, with awareness, give more importance to one aspect compared to another. So the question briefly is, when someone, just to simplify, like someone has a trauma, an experience of, as we said before, like a sense of abandonment or something, some traumatic experience that then at some point comes up and it manifests. So the question is meditation a valid way to heal that trauma, or are we only do are we only doing more damage and reinforcing? Here we need to understand what we mean by meditation. There are so many different techniques. Normally, in this case, a technique that can be used, because the word meditation means to familiarize oneself, and there are some types of there's some states of mind that don't come spontaneously, and the more I familiarize myself with this mind, the more spontaneous they become. So we would induce ourselves to generate mental states that are opposite to the one we want to change. So I connect myself with the antidote instead of reinforcing the traumatic experience or the mind. I feel loved, I feel protected, I feel secure. And one key in meditation is doing this. At the beginning, it's more conceptual, but then it becomes less conceptual using visualization, because in our mind, what happens is what we imagine, it's as if we lived it. So when I live something, whether I live it through my five senses, or if I live it through my sixth sense of the mind, it's the same. And this changes our memory, changes our experience. So one way to heal a trauma is to create new experiences. But the key, and here we talk about the importance of looking and knowing these 51 mental factors, knowing the mind better. If I bring light where there's already light, I'm not getting rid of the darkness. But if under the table it's dark and I turn on all the lights, it's going to stay dark under the table. So first I need to know how to turn on the light, and then I need to know how to bring the light to the darkness. So it's not enough to see where there is darkness. Once I'm able to generate light, I need to see where there are shadows, and I need to bring the light to that darkness and eliminate the darkness. So if I'm able to generate an opposite feeling, a feeling opposite to abandonment, and create a positive feeling, I feel loved, I feel protected, I feel secure, etc. When I'm able to feel that, at that point, I leave that, I set aside that feeling of security, and then I come into contact with that feeling, that memory of abandonment. And when it arises, and that's where I can apply that antidote of feeling secure and love against that feeling of abandonment. That's one technique. Here, when we'll go look at the 51 mental factors, it's understanding the mechanism of our mind. And once we understand the mechanism, we can manage it all better, manage our mind better. The first are the most important, in my opinion, when the five omnipresent mental factors, or the five concomitant aspects. For me, they're very, very important. And we have time. As Geshe Gyältsän says, this master of the 12th century who wrote the 7-point mind training. In another text, he says the mind is full of defects, but it has one great quality. What you teach it, it will follow. And it's important for us to understand that to be able to direct our mind, we need to understand how it works. And seeing that, we can be a little bit smarter, a little more sly, and it's us. It's not that we set our mind aside. It's still us. But when we talk about the clarity of the mind, I mean, here we're all talking about seeing our own mind. If the mind can see itself, we're able to direct it better by seeing this clarity, because what happens in many of us, not knowing the mechanisms of our own mind, it seems like everything we live is a direct result of what is happening around us. Everything, our feelings, our sensations, and our emotions, our thoughts. It's as if it were a result of what's happening around us. But instead, when we look more closely at the mechanisms of the mind, we see that it is not like that. Now, what else did I write here? It's a long time. I'm curious to see what I wrote, because it's been a while since I've looked at this. So the primary mind can be compared to the hand, while the mental factors would be the fingers, the palm, etc. of the hand. There are 51 mental factors that compose the primary mind. At the end, and here the footnote says, note that there are innumerable mental factors. However, in the compendium of the Abhidharma by a Sangha, 51 are listed to clearly present those which are considered to be the most important. I mean, so it's important to remember that they're not only 51. It's a Sangha who noted the most important, the 51 mental factors that are considered to be the most important, but there are innumerable. So there are 51 mental factors that compose the primary mind, almost like micro thoughts that make up a thought. A thought can be made up of various mental factors with a minimum of 5, the so-called 5 omnipresent mental factors. So there are 5 mental factors that are always present, and instead the other mental factors can be there or not. So these omnipresent mental factors are very important to see and to know. We really see the mechanism of our mind, the workings of our mind here with the 5 omnipresent mental factors. The others are more like these micro thoughts. Is the difference between the primary mind and a mental factor clear? So it's not that there's a primary mind and mental factors. The primary mind is made up of mental factors, and the mental factors and one's own primary mind. We said here, so the primary mind is surrounded or made up of these mental factors that compose. We have the 5 mental factors, and the primary mind and its surrounding mental factors have different. We're on page 14. The 5 concomitant aspects. The primary mind and its surrounding mental factors have different aspects, but they are of the same entity, the same nature. And so he's clarifying. So the primary mind. So primary mind and mental factor are not 2 separate things. But a characteristic of the primary mind is that when I come into contact with a sensory object, it arises immediately. It's like, how can I say, it perceives the object in a generic way, and then there are many aspects that form that primary mind. More details. Somebody else asking a question. No, the primary mind and its its mental factors are of the same nature. One doesn't exist without the other. There's not the primary mind and then the mental factors. If you take away the mental factors, there is no primary mind. If you take away pasta and tomato and the salt and the oil, then you can't have pasta with tomato sauce. So you need all the ingredients. But there's some fundamental ingredients. You need pasta and you need tomato sauce. And then you can put olives, you can make it spicy, you can add other ingredients, but some are fundamental. So every primary mind has 5 fundamental aspects that are called the 5 omnipresent mental factors. Now, let's do something. Let's leave this for tomorrow. And let's try to look just in a general way these 51 mental factors. This is the first time that I went to ask for these teachings. My master asked me if I had memorized them, and I hadn't. He said, first you memorize them, and then you come back to me. And so the beautiful thing is that the ancient Tibetan way is that first you memorize without understanding anything, and this creates a kind of curiosity. When I learned the name of the mental factors, I had no idea what they were. And I memorized all of them. And then when he started explaining it, oh, okay, this is this, that is that, and it opens up doors. And having already memorized them, it stayed with me. It had a stronger impact. So these main mental factors, the main ones are the 5 omnipresent mental factors. There are 5 object ascertaining mental factors, and then there are 11 wholesome mental factors, and then the 6 root afflicting mental factors, and then the Nyenyo Nishu, the 20 secondary afflicting mental factors, and then Shengurshi, the 4 variable mental factors. They are neither positive nor negative. If they're together with positive mental factors, then they become positive and vice versa. Positive, negative means if that what brings to suffering would be negative, that which brings well-being and happiness would be something positive. So we start with the 5 omnipresent mental factors. Kuntana, they're always present. Sorwa dusha sempe yila chempa rekpa. Feeling, discernment, intention, attention, and contact. Of course, we'll look at each one. Then we have the 5 object ascertaining mental factors, the 5 mental factors that when they are present, the perception of that object is clearer. We have aspiration, firm apprehension, mindful recollection, concentration, discriminating awareness. And we'll look at each one. Then we have the 11 wholesome mental factors, that bring well-being and peace. And then we have the negative ones, and then the neutral group. The negative, we have the root negative ones, and then secondary afflicting mental factors that are less bad, but they derive from the root afflicting mental factors. And then there are variable ones that depend on the others that are present. So what I invite you to do is to read the 51 mental factors. Try to create, I don't mean to memorize them, but create a little bit of curiosity. But we have a little bit of problem with the translation, that when we translate from Tibetan, we use terms that we know in our own language, but those terms don't necessarily mean the same thing as the Tibetan term originally did. When we learn the 51 mental factors, for example, most words, most of the words are words that are not even used in the daily life, and one of the points of studying is learning the meaning of these new terms. But what happens is when we translate them, we're using terms that are already existent, that already have meaning for us. And sometimes it's harder to give a new meaning to a word that we are already familiar with than learning a new word that we don't know. Give meaning to a new word. So when we read the translation, in certain cases it helps us understand what it means, but in other cases, we exchange one thing for another because they're terms that in our language don't exist. And luckily, we we can look at them one by one, and we'll look at the definition and the function and try to understand one by one what they really mean. And we'll do this with all the necessary time that we need. To conclude for today, the fundamental point is our mind is a union of perception of talking about the gross mind. It's a flow of thoughts. We go from one object to another, and when we change the object, when we go from one mind to another, primary mind, and every thought that we have, in reality, it's at the beginning of a thought, and at the end of that thought, when is established when we change the object. If I'm listening to the sound of the singing bell, that's a primary mind that perceives the sound of the singing bowl. And when I start listening to the sound of my voice, that's another primary mind. Just trying to simplify things a little bit. And within each one of these thoughts, there are many characteristics that we'll go and look at. So the first 5 determine the basis, the mechanism of how we perceive. I think we can stop today here. We'll see each other again soon. We follow our Western tradition of the 31st of December, trying to give it a different kind of meaning. Also because in the Asian tradition and also in the West in the past, when does the day begin? If I say see you tomorrow, when is tomorrow? Is it midnight or is after sunrise? It's night. It's the evening. I say, oh, see you tomorrow. You do. Is that it's after midnight? Is already tomorrow, or is it the next day when the sun rises? So, when I went to study different calendars, day begins with sunrise. The day that begins with the strike of midnight is something really quite recent, and is a convention, which is fine, but the day begins really with the sunrise. But since we live within this convention, we will celebrate the new year by staying together until midnight. But I think it's really kind of a crazy convention because and the night needs to finish. The day begins with the sunrise, even on an energetic level. So even the Tibetan New Year begins at dawn, but it would be important to start the year by doing something virtuous. So it's said that the first thing done in that new cycle, directs the whole cycle. So we're going to live the new year at midnight, but then unfortunately we start the first day of the new year, maybe hungover or exhausted, we're confused and tired. I mean, it's a choice. It's a choice. But so different ways of doing it. But what we're going to do today, now we're going to conclude this part of the teachings, and we'll see each other at dinner, and then we'll come together for a moment of reflection, give direction to the new year, what we want for the new year. And tomorrow morning, we're going to start the day in middle way between the ancient way culture, Tibetan culture, and Western culture, because the Tibetan culture, we usually begin the ceremonies of the new year around 3 a.m. because we begin with the sunrise. Instead, we'll start at 10 a.m., not too early, to unite the various cultures, traditions, and we will have a good an auspicious puja tomorrow morning. After we'll see each other. I'll explain everything. Explain everything. I just want to say one more thing about the 51 mental factors, or underline something that I've said before. There's no hurry to understand everything. We shouldn't have this thing of wanting to right away to have understood everything. These are things that need time. We need to see and see again, reflect, and little by little. The Asian way of transmitting of knowledge is very different. It's cyclical. You go around. It's more like a spiral, opposed to the linear way that we're used to in the West. So there are things that are, you'll see, there are things that are repeated again and again. It's like a spiral, a puzzle. You know, that we learn the different pieces of the puzzle, and we're able to put them together, and it becomes clearer. So we're going to try to unite the Eastern and Western tradition, because if we did it in the Eastern way, Oriental way, we'd be here for a long time. But what I want to say is there's no hurry. It's a process that takes its time, and one part comes together with another, and day after day things will make more and more sense. So it's time for our dedications for today.
Drove munsila tato ne gyur chi kewa kuntu yanda lama dan drame chöki pela longche ching sada lamge yönten rab dorje change kopa nyur tove sho nimo dele tsendele nime kuyan dele xing Kuncho sumke ngodrubo tso, kuncho sumke trashi
At dawn or dusk, at night or midday, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to achieve all realizations and sprinkle the path of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness.
At dawn or dusk, night or midday, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to achieve all realizations and sprinkle all the path of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness. Ci vediamo per cena.
See you for dinner, 8:30.
Alle 8:30 ci vediamo per la cena.
See you at 8:30 for dinner. Thank you, everyone.